Okay, get ready to dive deep, everybody, because today we're tackling the fascinating world of electrical signals in nerve cells. And we're lucky enough to have some seriously in-depth research to guide us. We're talking about Dr. Clarkson's presentations on, get this, electrical signals of nerve cells and voltage-dependent membrane permeability.
Yeah, Dr. Clarkson doesn't mess around, does he? Those titles alone are a mouthful. But trust me, the research is pure gold, and we're going to break it all down for you.
Pure gold, maybe a little dense too. Dr. Clarkson jumps right into a whole bunch of different electrical signals that nerve cells generate, things like resting potential, receptor potential, synaptic potential. But the one that really caught my eye, and maybe it's just the name, is the action potential. Just sounds important, doesn't it?
Oh, it is. It's the star of the show, really. Think of these electrical signals as the language of the nervous system, the code our brains and bodies use to talk to each other. It's how we process information and tell different parts what to do.
So basically, our brains are having this nonstop conversation with the rest of our bodies, and it's all happening through these electrical signals. And what's wild is that there are different types of signals, right? It's not just a one-size-fits-all message.
Exactly. Think about all the things your body senses and reacts to: a gentle touch, a burning stove, someone's voice. Each of those triggers a specific pattern of electrical signals that our brains interpret and respond to.
Man, that's just mind-blowing. Okay, so we know these messages are zipping around through neurons, right? I vaguely remember those from biology class.
Yeah.
Could use a little refresher, though.
Absolutely. Take a look at this neuron diagram from Dr. Clarkson's presentations. See that long, slender part called the axon? That's basically the information superhighway of the nervous system, transmitting those electrical signals across long distances.
And at the end of the axon are the synaptic terminals, those branch-like things, like they're sending out signals to other neurons or muscles or whatever.
You got it. Think of it like a relay race. The axon carries the baton, that electrical signal, and passes it off to the next runner, another neuron, or a muscle cell at the synaptic terminal. But let's get back to that action potential for a minute. We keep saying how important it is, but what actually is it?
Well, Dr. Clarkson describes it as this wave of electrical activity that travels down the axon. It's
Yeah.
how neurons communicate over those long distances we were talking about. But what I always get stuck on is like, how does that wave happen? What gets it going and keeps it going?
So imagine the action potential as this carefully choreographed dance. It unfolds in four main steps or stages: depolarization, rapid depolarization, repolarization, and hyperpolarization.
Okay, so you're talking about changes in electrical charge. It's almost like the neuron has this internal battery that's constantly charging and discharging or something.
You're on the right track. At rest, the inside of the neuron's membrane has a negative charge compared to the outside. Depolarization is when that difference decreases, so the inside becomes less negative.
So it's like flipping a switch. Depolarization is on, and repolarization flips it back off. What determines if the switch is on or off, though?
That's where ion channels come in. Picture tiny gates embedded in the neuron's membrane. These gates control the flow of charged particles called ions in and out of the cell.
Hold on, ions. Like from chemistry class, I'm starting to feel a little lost here.
Don't worry, ions aren't as complicated as they sound. Think of the neuron's membrane like a wall, and these ions are messengers trying to get through. The ion channels are like doors in the wall, controlling who gets in and out.
Okay, that makes it a little easier to visualize. But why all the fuss about getting in and out? What's so special about these ions?
It's all about balance, or rather, the controlled imbalance of these ions. You see, there's a higher concentration of sodium ions outside the cell and a higher concentration of potassium ions inside.
So it's like a crowded room versus an empty room.
Exactly. And just like people, ions want to move from where they're crowded to where there's more space. This difference in concentration creates a kind of potential energy, what we call an electrochemical gradient.
Ah, gradients, like a slope. Things naturally want to roll downhill.
Exactly. And when those ion channels open, it's like opening a door between the crowded room and the empty room. Sodium ions rush in, potassium ions flow out, all trying to balance things out.
And all this rushing in and out creates an electrical current. Is that how we get those signals?
You got it. Now, going back to the action potential, it's important to note that it follows an all or none principle.
Like a light switch. Right. It's either on or off, no dimming.
Exactly. But if all action potentials have the same intensity, how does your brain know the difference between, say, a gentle touch and a firm handshake?
Yeah, that's always confused me. How could a bunch of on or off signals tell you how strong something is?
It's all about frequency. A stronger stimulus, like that firm handshake, triggers a higher frequency of those action potentials. More signals in a given amount of time means a stronger message.
So like Morse code, it's not just about the individual signal, but how often it's sent. Okay, that makes more sense. But what about the speed of those signals? I mean, we react to things super fast sometimes.
That's where myelin comes in.
Ah, myelin. Isn't that the fatty stuff that wraps around the axon?
Right. Think of myelin as the insulation on an electrical wire. It prevents the signal from degrading as it travels.
So it's like a protective coating.
More like a speed booster, actually. With myelin, the action potential doesn't have to travel continuously along the axon. Instead, it jumps between these gaps in the myelin sheath called nodes of Ranvier.
So the signal gets to skip ahead. That's pretty clever.
hmm
Does that mean all axons have myelin then?
Good question. Not all axons are myelinated. It depends on the specific function of the neuron. For example, neurons involved in things like reflexes or sensory perception, those are heavily myelinated because we need those signals to travel fast.
So it's like our bodies prioritize which signals get the express lane. But what happens if something goes wrong with the myelin?
That's a critical point. Damage to myelin can have serious consequences. One example is multiple sclerosis, or MS. In MS, the body's immune system mistakenly attacks the myelin, disrupting the transmission of nerve signals.
So the signals can't travel as fast, or maybe not at all. That must really mess things up.
It does. MS can lead to a wide range of symptoms, from muscle weakness and fatigue to vision problems and even cognitive impairments. It all depends on which nerve fibers are affected and how severely.
Wow, it's incredible and kind of scary how much depends on this one thing. But we've talked a lot about how these signals travel, what gets them started in the first place.
That's where things get even more interesting. It all comes down to how those ion channels we talked about are controlled or gated. Remember, they're like doors and something has to open them.
Right, I get that. But what's this something? How do they know when to open and close to create those signals?
Well, there are different types of ion channels, each with its own opening mechanism. Some are voltage gated, meaning they respond to changes in the electrical potential across the membrane.
So once the voltage reaches a certain point, boom, open they go.
Exactly. And that sudden rush of ions, that's often what triggers that depolarization phase of the action potential. It's like a chain reaction, one change triggering the next.
Okay, that makes sense. But are all channels voltage gated?
Nope. There are also ligand-gated channels. They open in response to specific molecules binding to them, like a key fitting into a lock.
And the key in this case is,
Often it's a neurotransmitter.
like dopamine and serotonin. Those are neurotransmitters, right?
They are. They act as chemical messengers between neurons. When an action potential reaches the end of one neuron, it triggers the release of these neurotransmitters. They then bind to the ligand-gated channels on the next neuron, causing them to open and potentially trigger a new action potential.
So it's like a complex dance between electrical and chemical signaling, all happening in milliseconds. My brain is officially fried.
It's a lot to take in, that's for sure. But this is just the tip of the iceberg. There's so much more to explore about these intricate processes.
Well, I think we've given our listeners plenty to digest for now. But speaking of things that mess with our brain, last time we teased a little something about drugs and toxins, remember?
Oh yeah, the good stuff.
So are we talking mind control, brainwashing, truth serum? What's the deal with these drugs and toxins that can mess with our electrical signals?
Well, maybe not mind control. Yet. But Dr. Clarkson does talk about some pretty wild examples, starting with something you're probably familiar with, anesthetics.
Oh, right. Like what they give you before surgery so you don't feel pain.
hmm
But how do those actually work? Do they just like shut your brain down for a while?
Not exactly. They're more targeted than that. Local anesthetics, like lidocaine, they zero in on specific ion channels that are involved in transmitting pain signals.
So instead of shutting down your whole brain, it just blocks the pain. That's pretty handy when you think about it.
It is, right. But what's really fascinating is that there are actually toxins in nature that do something similar, but with much more, shall we say, dramatic consequences.
Uh-oh. That doesn't sound good.
Dr. Clarkson talks about this one toxin called tetrodotoxin. It's found in pufferfish,
Wait, pufferfish, the ones that like puff up.
the very same. And it turns out those cute little guys harbor a potentially deadly neurotoxin. Like lidocaine, tetrodotoxin also blocks those sodium channels we've been talking about.
Okay, but I'm guessing it's not quite as targeted as a carefully measured dose of anesthetic from a doctor.
Yeah, that's the problem. Tetrodotoxin doesn't discriminate. It blocks those sodium channels indiscriminately, which means it can paralyze muscles, including those we need to breathe.
Okay, that took a dark turn fast. Pufferfish, man. Who knew? But It's kind of amazing, though, when you think about it. These tiny little molecules, completely invisible to the naked eye, can have such profound impact on our bodies. Just goes to show you how powerful those electrical signals really are.
Absolutely. They're the foundation of everything we think, feel, and do. Every thought, every emotion, every movement, it all starts with those tiny electrical impulses zipping through our nervous system.
It's mind-boggling. We've covered a lot of ground today, from those basic building blocks of neural communication all the way to mind-altering drugs and toxic pufferfish. And we've just scratched the surface, really. There's still so much more to learn about this incredibly complex and fascinating system.
It's true, we're only just beginning to unlock the secrets of the brain. But every new discovery brings us closer to understanding who we are, why we do what we do, and how to treat diseases that affect this intricate system.
It's like exploring a whole new universe,
Yeah.
but this one is inside our own heads. Well, that's about all the time we have for today's deep dive into the amazing world of electrical signals in nerve cells. We've journeyed through a world of ions, electrical currents, and those all-important ion channels, and I hope you've come away with a new appreciation for the symphony of activity happening inside your own brain at this very moment.
And maybe a healthy dose of caution around pufferfish.
Yeah, maybe skip the fugu next time you're at a sushi restaurant.
Yeah.
Until next time, keep those synapses firing, and thanks for joining us on The Deep Dive.